this is Pico Entertainment, and here now we have another video for you in what will be the 7th edition of our Movie Face-Off series, where we look at two movies that are similar in terms of genre, release date or relevance, and have a debate and comparison as to which film is overall superior. So in this edition we will look at the first two entries within the Terminator franchise, which are widely considered to be the best within the series. The first film, which was released back in October 26, 1984, a low-budget science fiction horror outlining the future war between man and machines dictated by an AI known as Skynet. A Terminator cyborg is sent back in time to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, who is the mother of the leader of the future resistance, John Connor. Directed of course by James Cameron, with ex-bodybuilder now turned movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger in the lead role as the Terminator. 7 years later, the long-anticipated sequel, released on July 1st, 1991, essentially repeating the narrative of the first film, this time with an enhanced Terminator known as T-1000, sent back in time to kill John Connor in his early teenage years. So after both, which are justifiably so considered to be the both best installments of the franchise, which one is actually the superior movie? Well, when we look at the first element in terms of story, we really have to give it to the first film, primarily because the sequel is basically a repeat of the story of the first movie. Having a Terminator as the villain brings much more of the tension and suspense, and the film is kept much more leaner and purposeful, very much that nocturnal chase thriller as opposed to the more high action adventure that we see within the sequel. We also mustn't underestimate the role of Kyle Reese and his own compelling mission to try and preserve hope from the nightmare world that he comes from. His relationship with Sarah is steadily developed and overall is much better in terms of narrative than the far more forced father-son dynamic between the Terminator and John Connor from the sequel. We then look at the element of action, and no surprises here that Terminator 2 wins, as fully expected so. With the infinitely larger budget and resources, it was every bit the large event blockbuster that it was designed to be. Now, to be fair, the first film still has some well executed sequences, whether it's the slow motion and build up of the tech noir scene where we see the Terminator first coming across Sarah Connor. We have the tense chase car sequence within the car park where we see Terminator and Kyle Reese with shotgun blasts as they're driving through. Very good to see. And of course we have the iconic moment, the I'll be back scene, where we see the Terminator crashing into the police station before taking out all of the cops in brutal fashion. But you simply can't deny the awesome set pieces from the sequel. The opening Future War sequence alone still surpasses a lot of modern action films today, still every bit as jaw-dropping now as what it was when you saw it on the screen for the first time. We have the equally great truck chase during the day as the T-1000 pursues John Connor on his motorbike. We have still those super cool moments of the Terminator, one-handed spinning reloading of his shotgun on his bike, still so cool to see, and all of this sequence is propelled by Bad Friedel's pulsating music. The same goes again for the night chase where we see the T-1000 pursuing the heroes once more in the police van, this time flying in a helicopter, as we see the helicopter flying over and underneath a bridge. All real, no CGI, absolutely fantastic. And everything in terms of the action is brilliantly constructed and executed, justifying the film's tag as truly being a great action sequel. And following on from the element of action, we talk about the effects, where once more we have to give the nod here to the sequel, very obviously so. It truly can't be denied, for all of the mention of the set pieces, the film's biggest legacy of course was the revolutionary CGI, and this of course concerns the T-1000, and it really can't be estimated enough, seeing all of the awe and wonder of the morphing and transforming effects for the first time, that absolutely still hold up today, putting all of the effect shots from the later sequels to shame. We then talk of the cinematography, which is actually a lot closer than what people would think. As mentioned before, the scale and action and effects all go to the sequel, all impressive to see, but in one sense the film almost looks too clean, too smooth, too processed. When we look at the first film, the low budget actually was to its advantage, really giving this much more rawer grittiness to it, providing a far more visceral edge to the overall action. And this is most apparent when we compare the Future War sequences of both films, using practical and projection effects, which is always good to see. The sequel is far more electric and kinetic in terms of its sequence, but again it looks a bit too bright, a bit too condensed and just a bit too clean. When we look at the war sequences from the first film, they really have that dark atmospheric feel to it, with all of the smog and dirt and grit again. It just looks more real and feels more frightening and haunting, and a lot more scarier. Even Brad Fiedel's music goes a lot harder with those pulsating synths and those operatic tones. We then talk about characterization, and here I think the first film is superior. This is where we talk, of course, about the role of the Terminator. As the villain, he is a truly unrelenting force, pure evil, which again adds to the suspense, fully justifying the decision to have Schwarzenegger in the villainous role. Now we do understand, because of Schwarzenegger's prominence as an actor, when it came to the sequel, casting him as the heroic role in many ways seems understandable. But just the sheer idea of a goody Terminator, not killing anybody, being more in touch with his emotions or the emotions of John, just doesn't fly. Even though the film does provide context in having the chip within the Terminator being reprogrammed, having a much more contemplative Terminator very much seems a contradiction. The whole point of the concept is that this was a force that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be bargained with, and that was in many sense the thrill of the entire character. If you take those elements away, you take away a lot of the menace and the aura of the overall role. We then talk about Sarah Connor, and yes, without question, Linda Hamilton's both physical and character transformation in Terminator 2 did go on to become one of the most iconic female action archetypes within cinema. She's all vivid intensity and rage, and yes, this is a credible progression from the first film where we see her at the end of the movie. It makes complete sense that she would go on to strive to delete any development of the machine technology within the current times, trying to prevent the war before it even happens. But there's also this equally unstable, unhinged mental state about the character that at many times makes her far less likeable, and this is in very sharp contrast to the much more compassionate beauty and vulnerability that we saw Sarah Connor within the first film. We then have John Connor's much more angsty and whiny teenager trope, very cliche, and again the much forced relationship between both him and Terminator is very on the nose and far less credible and convincing than the relationship we saw between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor from the first film. So we then go on to talk about box office, and whilst not being the biggest movie of 1984, the Terminator still very much succeeded, taking in over $78.7 million from a back then very shoestring budget of around $6.4 million. Now of course that pales in comparison to the second film, in which wasn't only just a bigger box office success, it was indeed the biggest success of 1991, grossing over $520.9 million from a budget of around $94 to $102 million, back then being the most expensive movie ever made. But we'll then finish this debate in terms of impact and legacy, and it's a very close contest. When Terminator 2 was released, it was very much the first truly cultural event film of the 1990s. As somebody who grew up during its overall release, I simply can't state enough how huge this movie was. I've already mentioned the huge impact in terms of the action and effects. This was the first truly CGI revelation, and we wouldn't see a further development until 2 years later with Jurassic Park. But there are so many reference points throughout Terminator 2 that had cultural impact, whether it was the CGI, the essence of the T-1000, the Guns N' Roses soundtrack song You Could Be Mine. We have of course the iconic line, the Hasta la Vista baby, spoken by the Terminator 2/3 of the way through. And the movie's success certainly cemented Arnold Schwarzenegger as the top action movie superstar of the industry. And definitely without question, the film was a cultural phenomenon, connecting with many audiences, and as mentioned before, truly dominated the year of 1991. Now despite all of that, I'd still lean to say that the first film was even more impactful. The mere fact that the sequel happened in the first place was because of the large impression made by the original. While successful on its theatrical release, its status gained even more traction many years afterwards in terms of the release on video. And this was something that was very common throughout the iconic films throughout the 1980s. And yes, we had certain science fiction films throughout the 70s, which certainly covered the territory in terms of artificial intelligence, but The Terminator was really the first film that really looked at the prospect in terms of what it could do in the current day climate, and how that overdependence on AI could really have a very devastating effect within the future. And let's be honest here, in terms of the future war sequences, we really hadn't seen something like that before within movies. Again, any type of large-scale action on that phase was really preserved for much more science fiction fantasy films, and all of the themes and illusions that we see within the original are still very much relevant today. And as stated, All the success and impact that the second film had really couldn't be achieved without the impact of the first film. The second film itself repeats a lot of the beats that we see already from the original film, and I just think overall the Terminator, the first film, was a classic example in how much more smaller budget movie making could achieve larger scale success. So in terms of that regard, and the fact that whilst both films are very impressive, and certainly a case could be made for the sequel, I still think overall, in comparison, that the first film from 1984 is overall the superior and best Terminator entry within the entire franchise. So those are my thoughts and feelings when comparing both the first and second Terminator movies. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have two other films that you'd like to see me draw a debate and comparison over, let me know in the comments. Or if you have any other topics regarding any other movies, television series, or any other films that you'd like to see me also give commentary on within the channel, again drop me a suggestion within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.